Manletown, an agricultural center of considerable size in eastern Iowa, had been awakened a short hour before daylight by a colossal grinding and roaring sound coming from the east. Before the startled, half-awakened people had been able to leap from their beds, however, the thing was upon them. It was horror, earthquake, annihilation, all in one, driving across the town with immense speed. A terrific crashing of shattered buildings spread through the community, and for an instant the gigantic grinding roar seemed receding westward. Then it had stopped completely. It was several minutes before anyone in the stunned city ventured out into the streets, half curious and half terrified. But those who finally did so were paralyzed by astonishment and terror. For a colossal path of destruction had been cut straight across the city's northern section. It was like a gigantic trench or canal gouged out by a superhuman instrument, being over a quarter of a mile in width and almost as great in depth. It began in an open field 3 miles east of Manletown and ended in a thinly settled suburban section a mile westward. Houses, people, trees, fences, roads, everything that had lain in the track of the unknown destroyer had vanished as though it had been whirled into space, and there lay open to the sun nothing but this vast wound in the earth's surface. Hundreds of people, it was estimated, had gone to death in the moment of the unparalleled cataclysm. Doubt. It is not surprising that panic sent the people of Manletown fleeing in all directions before the coming of the day. The newspaper stated that federal and state authorities had taken every precaution to calm them, and already many who had fled were returning to the stricken town, it being apparent that no further disturbance was taking place. But what had caused this one? Was it an earthquake or a volcanic action of some unheard of nature? No answer could be definitely made, but the geologists and other scientists consulted regarding the thing were in general agreement. It could only have been caused, they stated, by some giant meteor that had grazed the Earth's surface and gouged this great scar across it in passing. More could be learned from examination of the cut, but it was certain that a meteor was the cause. When I had finished reading, I looked up at Dr. Howard, sobered by the horror of what I had just read. A terrible thing, surely, I said, and he nodded somberly. Just how terrible is not yet realized, he commented. Why, you don't doubt that it was a meteor's work, do you? I asked. That great gouge. He shook his head. Who can say? But if a meteor of giant size did it, where is the meteor? They do not, as a rule, graze Earth and then vanish, ransom. Maybe not, I said doubtfully, but in this case the scientists all seem pretty sure. And after all, what other explanation for the thing is there? To that he did not answer, though I could see that he was unconvinced. So I was not surprised when Dr. Howard left for Manletown that night by a fast Chicago rocket express. To me, as to others, he said only that he wished to make a brief examination of the scene of the disaster with certain ideas of his own in mind. I knew without his telling, though, that his doubts persisted. The world at large did not share those doubts. There was widespread horror over the Manletown catastrophe, but it was the rather abstract horror aroused by some unprecedented accident of which the very strangeness somehow dulls the edge of reality. And none seemed to doubt the dictum of the scientists concerning the gigantic missile from space that had shot into the Earth's atmosphere, grazing its surface and then shooting out again. I know that, despite Dr. Howard's attitude, I myself did not doubt it. Dr. Howard returned from Manletown 2 days later. The only information that he imparted was that his investigations had proved satisfactory. He said nothing more and, assuming that his inspection had disproved his doubts, I forbore mentioning the thing to him. It was not until the second cataclysm, a day later, that I learned along with the rest of the world what his thoughts on the matter were. This second cataclysm took place on the afternoon of July 1st, but, because of the remoteness of its scene, word of it did not reach most of the world until the next day. For the scene of the second event was those bleak Finnish plains that lie east of the Baltic, and particularly one barren valley far from the nearest telegraph. News concerning what had happened was scanty enough. The central fact was that upon one of that valley's slopes, something had gouged from the grassy earth a tremendous trench like the one that had been cut through Manletown. It was of the same general size, several miles in length and a quarter-mile in depth and width, but in that remote place it had done almost no damage to life or property. The only damage to property, in fact, had been the destruction of a herder's hut that had been in the path of the thing. The 7 herders who had occupied it, luckily for them, had been tending their flocks on the slope of a neighboring valley. All had heard a gigantic roaring and grinding sound, and had run up to the dividing ridge as the sound ceased, to be confronted by the great gouge below. One of them, however, had been on the ridge at the time and told an excited and almost incomprehensible tale regarding it. He said he had been gazing down over the slope in question when the disaster had happened. First came a great flash of light in the air above, the flash of some colossal glittering body swooping from above to Earth's surface. He could not describe what he claimed to have seen of it in that lightning-like glimpse, and could describe it only as of something huge and glittering, and roughly scoop-like in shape. In the very second that he saw it, it had struck the slope, and then with great speed had rushed forward, along it, half burying itself in the earth, emitting a loud, grinding roar. In an instant it had streaked like light along the slope for several miles, and then with an upward flash was gone, the noise gradually ceasing. This tale, even doubted by the man's companions, certainly received small credit from the outside world. The paper that I read mentioned the story only as an illusion, born of excitement, and went on to point out that while the Manlatown cataclysm had been repeated, the explanation accepted for it had not been disproved. It simply meant that another giant meteor had grazed our globe, and it might well be that the Earth was passing through a swarm of them. I will own, however, that to me the meteor explanation seemed rather weakened by this so exact repetition of the first catastrophe, and I could not see how this recurring catastrophe could be explained so simply. Howard's theory. At the first news of the thing, I had sought Dr. Howard to learn his own views of it, but he was not to be found at the university. And by the time I had met him the next day I, along with most of the world, had read the late editions of the newspaper in which he first startled the nations with his astounding explanation of the 2 cataclysms. He stated that he had studied closely the scene of the first cataclysm, and had derived therefrom a theory as to its cause which he believed was substantiated by the second occurrence. No one who has considered carefully the Manlatown catastrophe, he stated, can credit for a moment the idea that it was caused by a meteor. Had a great meteor actually grazed the Earth that night, the sky for 1,000 miles would have flamed with its passing, even had it been able to pass out of Earth's grip after entering it, which is an incredible hypothesis. The cataclysm at Manlatown was not caused by a meteor, but by some vast scoop-like object that was drawn across several miles of the Earth's surface with immense speed and in that way gouged out the great trench in the Earth. This second cataclysm in Finland was obviously caused in the same way, there being no appearance of a meteor in the sky. The huge scoop of which I speak was actually seen in the second case by the Finnish herder whose story has been little credited. But the very wildness of which is almost a guarantee of its truth, especially coming from such an unimaginative person. We must accept, then, the theory that on 2 different occasions within the last few days a giant scoop of some sort has been lowered from outer space, dragged across the Earth's surface for several miles with incredible speed, and then jerked upward again, taking with it the matter it has cut from the Earth. Just as we men sail over the surface of our waters and let down trawls to drag along their beds far below, so someone, something or things, exist on the surface of the atmospheric ocean at the bottom of which we live, and is letting down trawls to drag its bottom, the surface of the Earth. This idea may seem fantastic to many. We human beings do not think of ourselves as living at the bottom of an ocean, but a little reflection will show that to be the case. The atmosphere is an ocean, 50 to 60 miles in depth, covering all the Earth. Our knowledge of it indicates that, becoming more and more rarefied, it has a fairly definite surface or limit a few score miles above us, beyond which lies empty space. So there is a great air ocean, and at its bottom we live. The pressure at its bottom is tremendous, even as the ocean's pressure is tremendous near its bottom. But like the creatures that live far down in the sea's depths, we are so habituated to that pressure, and our bodies braced internally against it, that we do not feel it. If we were to be taken into empty space, our bodies would explode as would fish taken from the sea's depths. And in the same way, were creatures accustomed to empty space to enter our atmospheric ocean, they would undoubtedly be crushed to death by its pressure. It is that which, in my opinion, accounts for this trawling from above. It may be that for centuries, while we have pondered on the planets and stars, ships from those planets and stars have been coming and going far above us, filled with creatures who have evolved in space as we have evolved in air and fish have evolved in water. We would know no more, dream no more, of the existence of those spaceships than the creatures at the sea's bottoms know of the great liners going and coming far above them. But suppose some of these beings, possessing spaceships, become curious as to what lies at the bottom of this air ocean of ours. They could not venture down into it. What would they do? Would they not let their ships cruise to and fro on the surface of the air ocean, and let down great trawls to drag the bottom far below, just as we men trawl an ocean into whose depths we dare not descend? I believe that is what is now going on. Far above us, at the surface of our atmospheric ocean, there are cruising ships or a ship, which we cannot see, holding beings from some great planet of whose nature we dare not guess. They cannot descend into our atmosphere, but they are letting down their great trawl from above to drag the bottom, which is Earth's surface, to see what lies upon it. And make no mistake, these beings, who may be infinitely beyond us in intelligence and science, and who are undoubtedly completely different from us in every respect, care not for the wreck and ruin they may be causing with their trawls. Any terror they might loose upon us would mean nothing to them. For to them, high above, we at the air ocean's bottom are no more than the blind, strange creatures that we fish from our own watery sea's depths are to us. It seems unnecessary to describe the turmoil that was aroused by this startling statement of Dr. Howard's. It is hard to expose the willful blindness of a world that now looks back upon that blindness with something like terror. Dr. Howard's theory became the target of every form and degree of criticism during the ensuing days. His idea was susceptible to ridicule, and the scientists whose meteor theory he had questioned seized the opportunity. Did we live at the bottom of an ocean, an atmospheric sea? Were we merely crawling things upon Earth's surface, to be fished for and examined curiously by unimaginable beings and vessels far above? The idea was too humorous. The public's indignation dissolved into laughter. The third, a very conceivable fact, was brought forward to demolish the ridiculous theory. If spaceships were passing to and fro constantly outside our atmosphere, why had they never been glimpsed by astronomers? Dr. Howard replied promptly to this by giving a list of unknown objects sighted by astronomers in space in the last decades, by Sporer and Wortman and Grech and Ferguson and Loomis, and scores upon scores of others, objects seen against the sun or moon or planets, and which had never been identified. There was no more criticism on that score, but a side issue was raised. Dr. Howard had stated that the atmospheric sea of Earth had in all probability a surface as definite as that of an ocean. Many attacked this minor point, but were met by Dr. Howard with the cold data of many tests, showing that while for a certain distance the air becomes rarer with increased altitude, it seems thereafter to remain constant, indicating that from that point up to its definite end or surface its density is the same. There was no valid reason why an ocean of air should not have as definite a surface as an ocean of water. Each new critical attack brought forward in those few days met with much the same treatment, and the criticism on the part of Dr. Howard's enemies began to change into bad temper and abuse. I mentioned this to him on the night of July 5th, showing him an account of the latest attack. From my first reading of his hypothesis, it had seemed to me crystal clear in truth, but conventional scientists had found its startling presumptions upsetting. They wouldn't believe it, some of them, if they themselves were picked up by a trawl from above and whirled around the Earth, I said. He shook his head thoughtfully. I think that they will believe it soon, Ransom, he said. If these visitations from above continue. You think they will continue? I asked. After all, why should they? If beings out of space actually are trawling, they must have learned enough from their 2 attempts to satisfy them about Earth's surface. I don't think so. For all we know, Ransom, they may be searching for minerals or ores or materials unknown to us, hoping to drag them up from the bottom of this air ocean. Or they may want living things, for purposes of their own. Or it may be mere scientific curiosity. God knows what motives sway them, but let us hope for one thing. And that they do not find whatever they are searching for. For if they do, if they come to look on Earth as a source of needed materials, it means the end of our civilization. Imagine those gigantic trawls descending in great numbers out of the skies day and night to gouge Earth's surface. Imagine perhaps great air submarines or hermetically closed ships of some kind venturing down here to the surface. Or submarine mines, caissons of some strange sort here at the bottom of the atmospheric ocean, creatures of dread. I shook myself clear of the horrors his words suggested. After all, I reminded him, this is a rather baseless fear. There haven't been any more cataclysms, and it may well be that. Abruptly I halted. Through the open windows of the apartment came the growing clamor of shouting voices. We ran to the window, and at the sight of the excited newsboys along the street I think that the same foreboding gripped us both. 3 minutes later we were looking together at one of the newspaper extras, reading it in a horror-dazed silence. Only a few hours before, the terror from above had struck Earth for the third time, and this time with the most terrible results thus far. For the victim had been Chicago. The colossal scoop which the excited Finn had attempted to describe had descended lightning-like out of the skies at dusk, and with incredible swiftness had cut a vast lane of destruction through the city. The colossal scoop had descended lightning-like out of the skies at dusk, and with incredible swiftness had cut a vast lane of destruction through the city. It glittered strangely as though composed of an unknown metal. The giant thing had been seen more or less clearly by many thousands, despite the swiftness of its action. It was colossal in size, much like a steam shovel's scoop in shape, glittering strangely, as though composed of an unknown metal. Its top disappeared far above into the night. The thing had struck the city's southern acres and in a moment, with a roar as of worlds splitting apart, had cut northward across the city and for a mile or more out into the lake, then flashing up into the dusk as swiftly as it had descended. Chicago was in uncontrollable panic, chaos of unnamable fear, and troops were on their way to quell the lawless rioting and looting that had already begun. When we read that, both Dr. Howard and I were silent for some time, listening to the disturbed hum and roar of excitement that penetrated the room from outside. And before either of us could speak, we were sharply aroused by the coming of a telegram. Dr. Howard read the brief message twice, then handed it to me, without comment. An hour later saw us in a great army plane flying southward through the night toward Washington. A conference. It was still night when our plane slanted out of the darkness into the blazing landing field lights. A powerful car awaited us, and as it sped with reckless speed across the city which was as aroused, excited, and horror-stricken as New York, we could distinguish now and then the great dome of the Capitol, gleaming white in the light of dawn. In a short time we were inside the Capitol, and were ushered into a small paneled room where a dozen or more men seated around a table awaited us. I recognized at once the strong face of President Rogers at the table's end, and perceived, also, the well-known features of the Secretaries of War and of the Navy. Beside them were the ambassadors of Great Britain, Germany, France, and a half-dozen other great powers, while secretaries and aides hovered in the background. It was the group, representative of the world's governments, that the President had gathered together at once after the Chicago cataclysm, and he had summoned Dr. Howard to meet with it. He greeted my superior and myself courteously, but the strain that he was under showed as clearly in his face as it did in the others about the table. At once he plunged toward the point. Dr. Howard, some days ago you gave to the press a suggested explanation of the Manlytown and Finland cataclysms which was, despite your scientific eminence, too startling to be accepted by the world or by your fellow scientists. That explanation has now been shown by this catastrophe that has riven Chicago to have been irrefutably true. We must accept, unprecedented as the situation is, the fact that vessels of some sort from outer space are actually trawling the Earth's surface from above its atmosphere, that trawl having been seen at Chicago by thousands, as it was seen in Finland. You alone among scientists have comprehended the nature of this menace. We have called you here to suggest some method of meeting it. Dr. Howard was silent and thoughtful for a moment, gazing from one to another of the anxious faces at the table. Then the President spoke again. You must be well aware of what the result of continued catastrophes of this sort will be. Already the wildest panic has gripped the section around Chicago and the rest of the country. The whole world, in fact, is trembling upon the brink of a similar panic. The very uncertainty of these disasters encourages panic. None can say that the next blow will not be in his city and cut away his home and his life. All are aware now that your theory is correct, and that adds to the horror. For if a vessel or vessels with alien beings of some sort in it actually hover far above, none can say what greater horrors it may still loose upon us. We must strike back in some way, must drive these beings, whatever their nature, from the earth. Would there be any chance of doing so with dirigibles or planes, in your opinion? Not a chance, sir, Dr. Howard replied at once. The rarity of the atmosphere at its surface makes even an attempt impossible, for no ship of ours could ever reach the surface of the atmosphere. But what are we to do? Is there no method by which we can combat this menace? Must we lie supine and let whatever cataclysmic terror they choose descend on us? All eyes were upon Dr. Howard as he gravely answered. Since I first comprehended what lay behind these catastrophes, I have sought for some method of halting them, some method of striking back at whatever ship or ships from space are hovering over us. To find such a method, I have had recourse to the same analogy that has been made so terribly clear to us, the analogy between ourselves at the bottom of our air ocean and the creatures at the sea's bottom. Suppose those creatures far within the sea's depths had some intelligence and science, and suppose they wished to halt the trawling of our ships whose great scoops sweep down now and again upon them. How could they do so? They could not venture up to the ocean's surface. But one thing they could do, and that would be to send up something that would fight for them, that would make it impossible for the trawling ships to cruise longer on the surface. They could, granted science and intelligence enough, construct great mines in vast numbers. These, if attached to air-filled globes, would be swept instantly up to the ocean's surface when released. They would float there indefinitely, and any ships cruising to and fro would sooner or later strike one and be destroyed, unless they were warned by the previous destruction of one. In this way the creatures of the sea's depths could prevent our cruising above and trawling for them. And this is the way we must use to fight the beings who now cruise far above us. We must mine the air. We must send up thousands of great mines constructed so that they will float up to the surface of Earth's atmospheric ocean and remain near that surface where, we know, the ships of these space beings are coming and going. With thousands of mines floating about, some of the invaders will inevitably be destroyed by a collision with one of them. The others were silent for a moment. Then the Secretary of War broke out. "Mine the air," he repeated incredulously. "But how? How could any mine be constructed to float up in that way, so light as to float on the atmosphere's surface?" "By means of steelite." "There we have recourse again to our analogy," Dr. Howard declared. "If a mine attached to a great hollow globe of air were released at the sea's bottom, it would rush up toward the surface and float there. In the same way, a mine attached to a great globe in which is a complete vacuum would rush up through our air ocean. We can construct those globes of the strongest and lightest material known, steelite. As you all know, steelite is the recently devised metal that has immensely greater strength than steel but the merest fraction of its weight. The tensile strength of a substance, its hardness and other qualities, depend directly upon the arrangement of its molecules. By the recent discoveries of Browning we know that when steelite is synthetically made, the arrangement of the molecules is such that it forms an extremely strong and rigid substance. This gives the material unheard of strength with unheard of lightness. A 40-foot globe of steelite can be made, with a charge of explosives of terrific power attached to it that will detonate when the globe is touched. This done, all air is exhausted from the hollow globe by great pumps, until the vacuum inside it is almost complete. The enormous strength of the steelite shell prevents its being crushed by the atmosphere's pressure as an ordinary steel shell would be. Released, the vacuum globe with its deadly charge will shoot up through the atmosphere with terrific speed. Its lightness for its size will be such that it will not halt until it floats on the very surface of our atmosphere. We will make these globes in countless thousands, each with its charge, and release them. Each globe will have a device that will repel any other, so that they do not detonate each other. We will sow the surface of our atmosphere with these deadly air mines. Sooner or later the ship or ships cruising to and fro on our atmosphere's surface will strike one and will be destroyed by its detonating charge. In this way, and only in this way, can we fight back against the beings from space who are releasing this horror on us. But to make these globes or mines in such numbers will engross all the Earth's industrial activities, the British ambassador exclaimed. "It will," Dr. Howard agreed quietly. "But what of it? Have you not yet realized that a world crisis is upon us? Have you not yet realized that in this case there is no question of countries or races, of profits or dividends or expediencies, but that we, as men, are fighting for the existence of man? That we are fighting against beings who may be immeasurably more advanced in knowledge and power than ourselves? Dr. Howard is right, said the President. Gentlemen, this emergency must be clear to you all, and I think that it is equally clear that Dr. Howard's plan is the only one that affords any possibility of combating this terror from above. I place all the resources of the United States of America at your command, Dr. Howard, and I know that when the representatives of the other nations here have reported to their governments they will do the same. The whole world's efforts must concentrate upon the prevention of these terrible disorders. There is but one thing Earth's peoples can do, Dr. Howard said. Make air mines. Thousands, tens of thousands, they must be turned out in ceaseless floods and released. For it is only with them that we can repel the menace above us. Make air mines. It was the watchword of all Earth's races within a few hours of that momentous meeting. For the President and the heads of the Earth's other governments sent statements in which Dr. Howard's suggested method of combating the danger was stressed as the world's one chance. Thousands of air mines must be made at once and continue to be turned out until the menace was repelled. Scientists agreed, as one man, that it was the one possible way of fighting these grim visitors from space who were hovering in their enigmatic vessels at the surface of our atmosphere. Within a half-day after the meeting, Dr. Howard and I, aided by several masters of aeronautical, chemical, and physical sciences, had drawn up the plans of the air mines. Each was to be a hollow steelite globe 42 feet in outside diameter. This would give the globes a gross lifting power of about 5,000 pounds and net of about 2,500. Attached in a special chamber at the side of each was the charge, a load of the most modern explosives, small in bulk but terrific in power, while striking pins on the globe's sides made it inevitable that the charge be exploded whenever the globe was struck. Through the night of the 6th, hundreds of men were busy in Washington turning out copies of the simple plans of the air mine, and scores of planes were flying throughout the world with copies for all nations. On the 7th, the manufacture of the great engines had already been begun in 100 cities. But on the night of the 7th, the terror struck again. This time it was with small loss of life, but the psychological effects were far greater. It was upon Upper Malaysia that the giant, glittering trawl descended, flashing down to rip a great trench of destruction through the jungle and along the edge of a native village, then flashing up again, leaving untold panic behind it.